Thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome back. We're here to talk about property protection offshore mainly, and we'll compare it to onshore so that there's a frame of reference for all you new risk engineers. You know what it is. Let's jump down into it. And property protection. So, I did get to go offshore a few times when I was working at a utility, and this was one of the trips. And you can see I'm there with Mark and Everett, just so you know who I'm talking about as we go through this. At the time, we were the fifth largest producer of oil in the Gulf of Mexico. We had a deep water spar, that's a floating oil production platform, and it was worth about $8 million a day back when oil was about $45 a barrel. And it was being completed. So four of the eight wells were completed, and we'll talk about what happened from some hurricanes later in the presentation. But for the E&P department in our corporation, the risk manager was told E&P was hands off, just let them do what they do, and you just handle all the power gen and everything else. And that meant that we had to get invited. I mentioned to the risk manager that if they can expose our deductibles and our premiums and our captive money to their losses, then we ought to see what they're doing to protect our earnings. And she agreed, but she said that we have to get an invitation. We can't just show up. So I started reaching out to talk to some of the management folks down there about coming down to see their facilities. And they said, sure, you can come after a little bit of a conversation. They said, but you're going to have to pay for the helicopter ride. And that was $8,000. So I went back to Linda and I said, hey, Linda, I got an invite. We can go, but it's going to cost $8,000. And I said, it's for the whole day, though. It's not just one ride. So she went ahead and got it approved. She said, if you got them to invite you in, then yes, I will get you the money to go do the trip. So, as I mentioned, we had two of the largest oil production losses ever to hit Lloyd's of London, and both years we were at full limit, 600 million. We only collected 300 million, and there were even more uninsured losses that didn't get collected. But insured losses that we collected was 300 million 2 years in a row. All right. So, what was the reason that this safety manager decided that they would allow corporate to come out and see what they did? Well, I said in the initial call, I wanted to understand how they contribute to earnings. That's all. I didn't say that I want to see what you're doing to see if it complies with corporate standards. And when I got there, they said that was the big thing, was that I wasn't coming down to explain to them how they should be operating, but I was coming down to understand what they did. That was the ticket that opened the door. And then while I was there, I helped build some mutual interest. I had been involved with process safety management. I knew that SIMP was a voluntary program for them back then. This was in the early 2000 time period that this was going on. So that's why we kind of understood each other. They were volunteering to comply with SIMP, but I was offering to help them audit informally to get their program just in better shape. So that's us heading out. We just finished our training and we're getting on the helicopter. The pilot's making sure that everything's ready for us. And we're about to head from New Orleans out into the Gulf of Mexico. And here we go. This is flying out over New Orleans, passing it by on the way out over the Gulf. The pilot gave me a little job to do while I was up there. I got to watch for other aircraft. He had a cool little screen that had a ping on it or a little dot whenever there was another aircraft in the area. He asked me that if you ever see one of those and I haven't acknowledged it to you, point it out, and we'll each just acknowledge and point out these aircraft that are out there so we both are aware of what's in the sky. And I said, perfect, this is great. It was a fun trip. Heading out there, it was about 2 hours to fly out. If we'd been in a boat, it would have been a 10-hour boat ride. Okay, so this just idea of where, when we show you the platforms out there, this is where all the oil needs to get to back on shore to be processed and distributed out to the States. Like I said, 2 hour helicopter ride was a 10-hour boat ride. The employees, the craft, all the workers that go out every 2 weeks, they change shifts. They're 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And they take this 10-hour boat ride out there. And then 2 weeks later, they take that 10-hour boat ride back. All right. This is what it looked like going into my first platform, Devil's Tower. I filmed it with my camera. Just remember, this is more than 20 years ago, and it was in color. Let's remember that. And the filmed on a spoon part was a comment from one of my previous videos. I loved it. It was funny. It made me laugh. It didn't hurt my feelings. So keep it up. All right. Once we got to the platform, we were greeted. We had a safety briefing. We were told where we should meet if there's a muster alarm and time to get off the platform. But then once our evaluation started, the StarTech engineer began interviewing the people in the control room, very similar to the way we would do it onshore. There's not much difference here in the way we evaluate these facilities. You'll see some of the differences in how they test and maintain their fire protection systems later. I love seeing AEDs. And of course, if you're out there in the middle of the ocean, 2 hour helicopter ride away, you're a long way away from emergency medical help. Automated external defibrillators are defibrillators that you don't need to be trained as a paramedic to use. Okay, so they interpret the heart signal and determine whether it's shockable or not. You don't determine if the patient needs a shock. It will advise you if the patient needs a shock, and it'll tell you to push the button. That's all it is. It's just you put the pads on and the machine starts talking to you. I had the first program started at Baltimore Gas and Electric in the early 90s, and I've already been contacted. There's been one life saved from one of the AEDs we had put out in the plants. Now it's time to start walking. We're going to walk around this platform. We're going to climb this platform. They had living quarters. This facility was sized to hold about 120 employees. At the time, they had about 80 there. So it wasn't full to the limit. But again, they were working some construction completion of 4 wells, and they were operating and producing out of 4 wells. So they had this mixed risk going on. All right, now we get into the electrical rooms. And remember, we're on an offshore platform and it's very compact and crowded. There's very little space. So they start to take up any kind of enclosed space, air conditioned space, heated space. This is prime space for storage. And who hasn't seen a few boxes in their rooms? But just don't put them up against the inlets or the grates for the HVAC system. You're going to defeat the whole purpose. You're going to overheat your electrical. All right, now we're getting a little bit crowded in here, and it's starting to look more like a maintenance shop than a switchgear room. Come on. And you look back in this previous one, I don't know if you see, but the blue box there, that's a transformer, and they're just covering it with supplies, and it's going to potentially be overheated. Or if it's not overheated, if it failed, then it's got fuel right next to it to spread this fire. I've seen these things catch on fire. And I have videos of these little transformers failing, and they don't do anything. They just fill the room with smoke. They make a big pop, and that's it. But if you've got them surrounded by combustibles, you're going to start a fire that will spread. All right, now the kitchen was kind of tight too, but they had a kitchen. It was very interesting to see. You've got the room for 120 people. You ought to have a kitchen. Well, they also had a New Orleans chef on every crew. So each shift had their own chef that would prepare great meals for everybody, and that's their only role, was to be the chef. They weren't somebody that was a deckhand that was cleaning toilets one minute, now cooking your dinner the next. This was New Orleans finest. So time to relax, right? You gotta, if you're on 14 days and off 14 days, the 14 days that you're on, you're working 12 hours and you're off 12 hours. Well, you're not sleeping that whole 12 hours that you're off. So you need a time and space that you can relax. And that's what they had, a nice little break room for these guys. They had all the snacks they could want. I don't know if that was the best thing for their health, but they did have pretty much all of their desires met. No alcohol on the platform at all. So for 2 weeks, these guys were dry. Another shot of the kitchen area. There's Mark grabbing some food. We were invited to join in. They had a good little seating area, and they love their parquet and their hot sauce. Parquet is sort of an artificial vegetable-based oil that people might put on their foods. Now, this is just a cool shot when you're on the platform and another helicopter's coming in. So these are the riser pipes. You see the oils from the 4 wells, the production wells are working. We've got oil coming in. And just a little more of a tour. We've got some manual valves. Now, how do we move the spar? I mentioned that this is a floating platform. This platform can move several miles, but it does it by basically pulling on chains that are anchored. So these anchors are set out in quadrants or in a plus sign, and then when the command's given to move, slack is let out on three of the chains, and one of the chains is pulled in, and then that moves the whole spar over. And the reason you want to move this spar or this platform is to drill. You're not going to drill all 8 of your wells in the same spot. You want to drill them in various areas over your formation. So you want to be able to pull oil out of all these different areas. One of the neat things that I learned about E&P was onshore, when they find an oil well, it could produce, it takes very little effort to find it, and it could produce for almost 100 years. Offshore, it takes a lot of effort to find something that'll produce for just 7 years. So the kind of plays that they look at offshore are not going to be long term, going to be here for a long while. It's going to be go in, get the oil out, and move on. Well, this facility would move around, and like I said, we still had 4 to go when the hurricanes hit. So that wasn't the best position to be in. But you can see it's a big internal combustion engine, like we'd have driving a fire pump. And these things were driving the big sprockets that move those chains. This is the riser room, just another view of where the oil comes up from the bottom back up into the platform to be processed. I had a great visit with a chiropractor pilot. A few weeks before my trip out there, I had bulged a few discs in my back, doing mulch, yard work, that kind of stuff, and had the MRI. Was in that waiting period where they said, yeah, you've got bulged discs, your options are surgery, or you can wait it out and see if your body heals itself. So I was in this waited out idea or mindset, and I'm talking to the pilot on our trip out there, and he tells me he's a chiropractor and he can fix my back. So when we get out to the platform, we walk over to a bench full of painters, and the pilot yells, "Vamos, vamos," and the painters all get up and leave. And he tells me to lay down on the bench, and I laid down, and he asked the safety manager to basically hold my leg in place while he then pulled my other leg across. And so he did a series of maneuvers to crack my back, to pop it. And yes, the pain in my leg went away for that day. I have to say that when it did come back, it was with a vengeance. And it was over the next several years that I dealt with the bulge discs in my back and all that. But it was a fun little sidebar to our trip to the offshore platform, getting an adjustment. All right. Then after we spent our time at Devil's Tower, went out to Main Pass. Started to see some differences between manned facilities and unmanned facilities. Specifically, there was some concern here, radiation accident. We got out of the helicopter, and we were not greeted at the heliport like we were at Devil's Tower. We were not given a safety briefing or told where to go when there was a muster alarm. So we wandered off the top deck down to the next deck and around the corner, and we started hearing somebody yelling at us. And we didn't really know what they were yelling or why they were yelling or if they were yelling at us, but we heard some yelling, and we kept walking, and eventually we saw somebody yelling and waving, and they told us to go back. So we turned around and we went the other way. And we went back, and when we went around, we got down to the other side and met with these guys, and they said, "Hey, we were radiographing a weld and you all walked right through the beam." And we're like, "What in the hell? Why wasn't it roped off?" And they said that they didn't expect anybody to come to the platform. We said, "Didn't you hear the helicopter?" They knew we were landing on that platform. They were in the middle of that job, and they didn't come protect us or prevent us from walking in through the beam of radiation. We have no idea what our dosage was, no idea how long we were in front of the beam, no idea what the dose rate from that beam would have been. And really, outside the nuclear industry, this is not the kind of thing that we would even know about reporting. Now, the people doing the radiographs might have been required to do that. It never got reported. No idea if we were injured. It took me 15 years before I developed cancer, but I'm not going to say it was from that. Now, we had a few flyby opportunities after we finished our trip at Main Pass, and we got to look at a few other platforms, some hefty. This one's a spar as well. All right, so what I noticed that was really different about the offshore versus the onshore, we would see that the fire pumps would start on a drop in pressure of, I would think, air. And I saw these little pressure or temperature sensors. They were just fusible links in what was clearly a pneumatic line. And I made an offhand reference of, oh, they're on an airline. And the operator said, no, that's gas. That's field gas. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, it's field gas. We get gas from the formation. It's 100% reliable. We always have that. Our compressors may not be reliable. The electricity may not work. The gasoline may foul. So we know that we've got reliable pressure for a pressure sensing system. Okay, but what about adding fuel to the fire? Doesn't it, when it melts and there's already a fire? He said, yeah, but it's adding so little compared to what this platform is going to have that it doesn't make a difference compared to the risk we're reducing by making sure that the pump starts. Okay, I get that. That was very interesting. So what else do we have here? All right, so I asked him, I said, well, how do you test your fire pumps? Onshore, we run them every week, and then once a year we do a flow test to see what the pressure versus flow is to understand if the pump is performing well and if it's wearing out. And I asked them, how do you test them? They said, we don't test them every week, but every month we turn them on and we flow water out of one of these hydrants, these monitor nozzles. And I said, oh, interesting. So you're flowing water every month. That's 12 times more than we do it on shore, but you're not measuring the pressure and you're not checking to see is the pump putting out enough water. And the operator, in just a statement of brilliance, said, as long as we can reach the other side of the platform, we've got enough water pressure. And I thought, well, that's it. That's exactly right. And that's all you need. So that's what they do. They make sure 12 times a year they can get the water from one side of the platform to the other. Totally different than we see onshore with pitot tubes and measuring and getting RPMs and making sure that the flow rates are corrected and everything else. They just simply make sure they can reach the other side of the platform. That's good enough. They don't need to meet NFPA 25 to be safe. This is what a lot of code cop people think, that you have to comply with codes to be safe. You don't. The elevated or the progressive, the engineer who is beyond the codes recognizes that solutions are out there. And even if you haven't come up with them, it takes one to know one, right? When you see a brilliant solution, it's great to see. That's all they need to do is just spray water from one side of the platform to the other. So comparing these two different offshore versus onshore, the offshore has a quicker, we're going to start that as soon as we drop pressure in field gas. Onshore, we have standards that say as soon as a fire detection or a flow switch comes in to start your fire pumps. But I'm here to tell you right now that I've never seen that actually installed or live. Everything that I've seen is drop in pressure. When your fire main pressure gets below what the jockey pump can maintain, the fire pump will start. If the electric pump can't maintain it, the diesel will start. If that can't maintain it, the next diesel will start. That's how we see fire pumps started. But offshore, as soon as they have some anomaly in the pressure system for all their equipment out there, that's when the fire pumps start. So it's quicker starting. They do flow tests way more often. And I'm going to argue that they're doing a performance test because they're also proving that it can reach the other side of the platform. All right. And the other interesting thing about offshore when I was going out there was you could not shut down a fire pump. You could not take a fire pump out of service for an impairment to do maintenance, to fix it, to test it, to do anything without the Mineral Management Service approval. That was the regulator that was responsible for regulating these oil wells in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, a sidebar that's interesting is that regulator collects 25% royalties on all the oil and gas produced from these platforms. So they have skin in the game. And you know that if they don't collect that 25%, they're going to be concerned. So that's why they want to make sure that the fire pumps are always available. And if they're not, they know about it. So we had to fax away a form, wait for the form to get signed and faxed back before we could do any impairments or work on our fire pump. Now, let's talk about the hurricanes, back-to-back years. I'll stay out of some of the details about premiums and deductibles and whatnot, limits, but let's suffice it to say that the first year we had a hurricane that hit our full limit, and it was going to be so long to adjust it that Lloyd's basically offered us 50 cents on the dollar and said, if you're willing to take it now, we'll pay you without going through a lengthy adjustment process, figuring out how much these wells would have produced if they were finished. And remember, 4 of them weren't finished yet. So they're going to have to go off of the production of the other 4 for the next 6 months to figure out what these 4 would have done during those 6 months. So they're telling us out of the gate, they're not going to pay us for 6 months. We had to meet earnings. right? Our management knew we had an earnings call, and the only way we're going to meet earnings is if we get millions of dollars in the door, because guess what? We had sold forward that oil that we couldn't get out of the ground now. And what were the circumstances of selling forward the oil? Well, for a long time, oil was very low. It was $12 to $14 a barrel. And it went up to $30 a barrel, and our company saw the opportunity. Oh, at $30 a barrel, we'll sell what we can. We'll sell 70% of the oil that we can produce this year and next year, all for that $30 price. Well, sadly, when the hurricanes hit, oil went up to $45 a barrel. Now we're buying it at 45 to meet these $30 contracts. We're losing our butts. We needed revenue. We needed money in the door. So regardless of what it meant for the future claim, we had to get these 300 million in the door. So we accepted it. And at renewal time, there were a lot of changes to coverage and a lot of changes to premium, a 500% increase in premium, put it that way. And a CFO who said that, you know what, we collected more than the oil is worth and the oil is still in the ground. Can we do it again next year? So it happened again next year. And again, same deal, 300 million instead of 600 million because we had to meet earnings. And at this point, the new insurance terms came back so poor that even our senior management knew that it wasn't insurance anymore and they had to balk. They weren't going to buy it. Well, if you don't buy that insurance, you can't go out to your investors and say that you're an oil and gas company slash mom and pop utility with no protection for the exposure to hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico. Because the last 2 years you've been saying the hurricanes aren't going to bother us. We have insurance. We have insurance. Now all of a sudden you don't have insurance. Well, guess what? Now you don't have an E&P business. And that's what ended up happening. We had to relocate about 400 employees out of New Orleans down to the Houston area. Some of the ones that stayed in New Orleans, just management type people, they would rebuild. And it was some interesting stories about their problems with rebuilding. All right, so a total of 600 million. And that really, the losses were 2 or 3 times that. That's all we could collect. And it led to the sale. We couldn't continue to operate these assets without the insurance. But we made $12 billion. That's right. So we sold it for a $12 billion profit. Senior management patted themselves on the back for not being able to get insurance anymore. And that money was then deployed in other energy sources for the company. So thank you very much for sticking around. That was my experience offshore, and it's a little bit different than onshore. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks.